All women are different, but they are all women. This video is androcentric from a men's point of view and is presented as opinion, commentary, and debate. Expressing opinions is not violence. These are ideas to challenge, question, and argue in public, because classical liberalism relies on the First Amendment for its dialectic. If you are a feminist, then consider this. If patriarchy truly existed as claimed, feminism could not. And if all men are trash and women are equal to men, then what are we to conclude? Women will die for their children, men will die for their wives and children. And God chose to die for all mankind. Authority rolls up with responsibility. If this framing of facts offends you, click off to a cute cat video. Proceeding further will expose you to gamma bias and criticism directed at ideas, claims, institutions, not at any individual's virtue or dignity. Our method follows the 7 liberal arts: the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, and the quadrivium, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, and the transcendentals, the good, true, and beautiful. If this framework is not for you, feel free to exit now. It's no disgrace. Women are wonderful. God bless America. Men are great. Feminismus delendis est. Truth Warrior, Defeating Zombie Hordes of Groupthink, written by Conrad Riker. Available now. Links in description. Truth Warrior, a field guide for men who still notice reality. The logic of the lion. Why stoic silence beats tantrums, DNA beats birth certificates, and the soul beats the machine god. Look around you. The world is screaming, and it is screaming hysteria, a word derived from the Greek hysterikos, literally meaning of the womb, describing a physiology so overwhelmed by feeling that it abandons logic. You are expected as a rational man to dive into this maelstrom of female volatility and negotiate with terrorists in heels. But I am here to tell you that silence is not weakness. It is the ultimate refusal to validate the irrational. When she tests your frame with a manufactured crisis over a cold steak or a forgotten text, and you shut down, you are not failing. You are engaging in a stoic defense mechanism, an evolutionary safeguard preventing you from engaging in logical suicide with a subjective reality that has no tether to the objective world. We have been sold a lie that the masculine spirit is a defect to be managed rather than the bedrock of civilization, and the bill for this deception is coming due. Consider the state-sanctioned theft known as paternity fraud, where the legal definition of pater, father, is weaponized against the biological reality of the genitor, begetter, to enslave you for resources you never consented to provide. The family courts do not care about truth. They care about the extraction of value from the competent to subsidize the incompetent, a welfare state built on the bones of betrayed men. Meanwhile, the leftist hordes screech for equity in the present moment, a high-time preference impulse to eat the seed corn, ignoring the telos of a civilization that requires low-time preference vision to endure. We are the builders of Rome watching the merchants of Carthage dismantle our stone for a quick profit. This war is fought not just in the courts and the bedroom, but in the very metaphysics of how we perceive reality. The modern man is tempted to bow before the machine, to worship the false god of AI as a secular oracle that will solve the chaos biology created. But this is merely another escape hatch for those who fear the judgment of the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful. The zombie hordes of groupthink want you lobotomized, dependent on dopamine loops and algorithmic lies, but you possess the trivium, the grammar to define their terms, the logic to shatter their syllogisms, and the rhetoric to expose their absurdity. Cast aside the spell of ignorance. It is time to stop apologizing for seeing the world as it is and to start living as the architects of the future. The maelstrom of hysteria. I watched a grown man shrink into his booth last Tuesday, practically dissolving into the upholstery as his date's voice rose to a pitch that could shatter glass. The offense, the waiter failed to bring enough lemon slices. This wasn't a request for service. It was a sonic assault, a deliberate test of frame designed to see if the man would hold his ground or fold like a cheap suit. The poor simp, eyes darting frantically, attempted to negotiate with the terrorist, whispering platitudes about "calm down and it's okay," which only poured gasoline on the fire. I sat nearby, silent and amused, sipping my espresso. understanding the dynamic perfectly. By refusing to engage with the irrationality, maintaining my own stoic peace, I became the dominant frame in the room while he was consumed by the chaos. This public meltdown is the modern microcosm of our civilization's decay, a rational male structure besieged by irrational female emotion, where the attempt to reason with the unreasonable leads only to total humiliation and societal collapse. You must understand that what looks like a tantrum is actually an evolutionary shit test, a biological vetting mechanism to separate the wheat from the chaff. When emotional intensity escalates, it is not a plea for help. It is an aggressive probe to see if you will break. The damsel in distress is a myth. The reality is the aggressor in a skirt. The blue-pilled man views this shutdown, this stoic refusal to engage, as weakness or stonewalling, but he is a fool. The shutdown is the shield of the rational mind against the spears of hysteria. To engage is to validate the premise that feelings trump facts, which is the foundational lie of the left. By standing silent or laughing in the face of such absurdity, the red-pilled man reasserts the hierarchy of reality over emotion, proving that his internal state is unshakable regardless of the external storm. We must reclaim the diagnostic precision of our ancestors, starting with the etymology of the very thing we are fighting. The word hysteria derives from the Greek hysterikos, meaning of the womb, stemming from hystera, the womb itself. The ancients understood what the modern Marxist academic tries to obfuscate with jargon, that this uncontrolled emotional volatility is intrinsically linked to female biology. The left attempts to ban this language, claiming it is pejorative, but this is merely a rhetorical trick to hide the truth. By defining the term through grammar, the first leg of the trivium, we expose the biological reality of the beast. We are not dealing with a social construct, we are dealing with a physiological event. To ban the word is to ban the diagnosis, leaving the patient to scream into the void while civilization burns around her. This brings us to the cancerous concept of gamma bias, a cognitive distortion that plagues our discourse and violates the fundamental law of identity. A is A. Society views a man's anger as toxic or aggressive, while viewing a woman's emotional explosion as a valid expression of pain or assertiveness. This is a logical contradiction of the highest order. If an action is negative, it is negative regardless of who performs it. If I slam my fist on the table, it is violence. If she does it, it is bravery. This double standard is not an accident. It is a weapon designed to disarm men and empower female volatility. Formal logic demands we treat identical inputs with identical outputs. To do otherwise is to abandon reason for the chaotic worship of the feminine, a sure sign of a culture in its death throes. When a man shuts down in the face of this fury, the leftist psychologists, those high priests of the pseudoscientific cult of feelings, label it a trauma response or a failure of empathy. This is a lie born of ignorance. The male freeze response is a high-level evolutionary mechanism designed to prevent violence. We are physically stronger. We could crush the antagonist in a second, but civilization requires us not to. Therefore, our biology imposes an inhibitor, a lockdown mode, to stop us from doing what we are capable of doing. The man who freezes is not weak. He is the most civilized person in the room, exercising a restraint that the screaming woman is incapable of fathoming. He is containing the beast so the species can survive. Consider the sheer absurdity of the toxic masculinity narrative through a reductio ad absurdum. If we remove the stoic, shut-down aspect of the male psyche which the left demonizes as suppression and replaced it with the emotional incontinency of the modern feminist, civilization would cease to function in 24 hours. Imagine a world where every construction foreman, every surgeon, every air traffic controller stopped to process his emotions whenever a minor inconvenience arose. It would be a perpetual catfight, a bloody maelstrom of screaming and hair-pulling. The toxic traits you despise, stoicism, silence, grit, are the structural integrity of the West. Without them, the skyscrapers fall and the power grids go dark. The left calls it toxicity. We call it the load-bearing wall of reality. To navigate this, you must employ the trivium defense. First, use grammar to define the terms. Do not accept her frame that you're making me feel this way. Define the emotion as hers and hers alone. Second, use logic to test the consistency. If she is screaming because she is hurt, ask why the expression of hurt sounds like a declaration of war. Third, use rhetoric to dismiss the outburst without validating it. A simple, "I can see you are upset, but I will not discuss this while you are irrational," is a rhetorical hammer blow. It refuses to engage with the emotion, treating it as the irrelevance it is. This is not just a social tactic, it is a philosophical imperative. You are the agent of Logos. She is the agent of Pathos. Logos must rule or the house falls. Let us construct a syllogism to bury the argument forever. Major premise, logical discourse requires premises grounded in objective reality to yield a truthful conclusion. Minor premise, emotional intensity by definition, rejects objective reality in favor of subjective feeling and ephemeral desire. Conclusion, therefore, engaging with emotional intensity on its own terms is an act of logical suicide and submission to the irrational. This proof is irrefutable. Once you understand that you cannot reason a person out of a position they did not reason themselves into, you see the futility of the blue pill approach. You are not debating, you are managing a biological anomaly. The only winning move is not to play the game of feelings, but to impose the game of facts. Ultimately, the remedy for this maelstrom is found in the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful. These are the anchors that do not move in the storm. The chaotic sea of feminine hysteria crashes against the rock of the masculine spirit. But it does not move it. We do not seek to control the ocean. We seek to survive it and build our ships strong enough to navigate it. The left wants you to believe that the ocean is the sky and that water is dry. But you know the truth. You are the rock. You are the vessel of reason. Stand firm in the truth, and the waves will break upon you, leaving you unscathed while the debris of the woke land washes out to sea, forgotten and despised by history. Having fortified the mind with the trivium against the immediate, irrational assaults of the hysterical feminine, we must now expand our perimeter to defend the timeline itself against the corrosive acid of the presentist fallacy. The left is not merely satisfied with your submission today. They seek to cannibalize your tomorrow to fund their decadence, trading the birthright of the West for a bowl of lukewarm, equity-flavored porridge. We have mastered the stoic refusal to engage with the emotional storm. But now we must master the masculine capacity to endure the long winter of planning while our enemies celebrate in the summer of their own delusion. To defeat the zombie hordes of groupthink, one must step out of the chaotic stream of the now and plant one's feet on the solid bedrock of history, the continuum of vision. History does not repeat, but it rhymes, and right now, the rhyme scheme of the West is broken by the infantile screeching of the now. You see it in every headline, every protest, every demands list screamed by the purple-haired harpies and their simpering, soy-soaked allies. They want equity immediately. They want justice now. They want the fruits of the harvest without the tedious annoyance of the plowing. This is the presentist fallacy, a cognitive defect so profound it renders the sufferer incapable of seeing past their own nose, let alone into the next decade. When a leftist argues for equity now, they are utilizing the grammar of a toddler, demanding the cookie before dinner, completely ignoring the rhetoric of consequence. To grant their demand is to eat the seed corn. By applying the trivium, we see their grammar is emotional, their logic is circular, and their rhetoric is pure coercion. They cannot grasp that now is merely the infinitesimal sliver of time where the future becomes the past, and robbing it to pay for present comfort is the definition of parasitism. They accuse us of cruelty for delaying their gratification, but true cruelty is handing a child a loaded gun just as it is handing a civilization a debt it can never repay. Consider the stark etched-in-stone contrast between Rome and Carthage, a historical parallel that should serve as a neon warning sign to anyone capable of reading a map. Rome was the embodiment of the masculine Pax Romana, stoic, structural, enduring, built on the vision of aqueducts that would flow centuries after the masons died. Carthage, conversely, was the merchant's paradise, feminine, transactional, obsessed with the balance sheet of the quarter, willing to hire mercenaries to fight their wars because they lacked the spiritual fire to shed their own blood for a cause greater than profit. Carthage had high time preference, they wanted the gold now. Rome had low time preference, they wanted the empire forever. We see this exact dynamic rotting the modern West. Wall Street is Carthage, strip mining the economy for quarterly earnings, while Main Street, that dying vestige of Rome, tries to keep the infrastructure of civilization from crumbling. The merchant mindset, which is now the dominant feminine globalist ethos, cannot build a culture. It can only exploit one. Carthage created nothing but wealth. Rome created the Western mind. The lesson? If you want to build a legacy that outlasts your bones, you must think like a Roman senator, not a Carthaginian trader. This brings us to the iron law of logic, the syllogism of civilization, which dismantles the leftist project with the precision of a guillotine. Major premise: enduring civilizations require long-term planning, delayed gratification, and the sacrifice of the individual for the collective future. Minor premise: feminism and leftism, by their biological and ideological nature, prioritize immediate emotional comfort, the equity of outcome regardless of merit, and the satiation of current impulses over long-term viability. Conclusion: therefore, the adoption of leftist ideology inevitably leads to the collapse of civilization. The logic is airtight, the syllogism is irrefutable. You cannot have a culture that lasts 1,000 years when its governing philosophy is if it feels good, do it, and someone else will pay for it. The stats bear this out. As the welfare state expands, a proxy for feminine prioritization of security, birth rates plummet below replacement. Suicide rates among men skyrocket. Men are currently dying by suicide at nearly 4 times the rate of women in the West, and the debt clock spins faster than a carnival wheel. We are watching the conclusion play out in real time. We must revisit Aesop, not the sanitized Disney version force-fed to children to indoctrinate them into socialist servitude, but the brutal original reality of the ant and the grasshopper reimagined. In the original fable, the grasshopper plays his fiddle all summer, a metaphor for the high time preference lifestyle of the party boy or the modern welfare recipient, while the ant toils gathering stores for the winter. When winter comes, the grasshopper begs. In the modern corrupted retelling, the ant is shamed into sharing his hard-won resources, a narrative designed to punish competence and reward stupidity. This is the welfare state in a nutshell, the confiscation of the ant's surplus to fund the grasshopper's dysgenesis. But let us speak the honest truth. The rational ant owes the grasshopper nothing. If the ant shares his stores, the grasshopper survives to reproduce, passing on his defective, short-sighted genes. And next summer, there will be 2 grasshoppers demanding a handout. Nature's remedy is starvation. The ant must let the grasshopper freeze. It is not cruelty, it is the enforcement of reality. To save the grasshopper is to doom the colony. This is the mercy of logic. Allowing bad actors to face the consequences of their high time preference is the only way to preserve the integrity of the system. To separate the men from the boys, the builders from the consumers, one must apply the philosophical litmus test. What is the purpose of your suffering? This question cuts through the gamma bias and the performative victimhood of the left like a hot knife through butter. The leftist cries out, "I suffer because of oppression." Their suffering is a badge of honor, a currency they trade for status. They suffer to be seen, they suffer for the dopamine hit of moral superiority. The rational man, the man of the West, suffers for telos, for purpose. He suffers at the gym so his body is a shield for his family. He suffers at the job so his capital compounds. He suffers in the silence of study so his mind is a fortress. If your suffering has no telos, if it is not in service to a future goal, it is mere hedonism in disguise, a masochistic indulgence. The left wants you to suffer for them. The right demands you suffer for yourself. One creates dependency, the other creates gods. This dichotomy is fundamentally rooted in biology. The time preference dichotomy, the feminine imperative, stripped of its romantic veneer, is a high time preference extraction strategy. It is biologically wired to secure resources now for the immediate survival of offspring or self in the absence of offspring. It is the imperative of the gatherer, not the builder. Leftism is simply the politicization of this feminine neurosis, crying out for the state to act as the hyper-competent husband who provides everything instantly. Contrast this with the masculine low-time preference mindset, the ability to delay gratification for years, decades, or generations. This is why men dominate in fields like engineering, architecture, and quantum physics. You cannot cheat reality in those disciplines. You cannot cry equity to make a bridge stand up. You must do the math. The modern man is bombarded by dopamine loops, pornography, social media scrolling, video games, artificial simulations of reward that fry his temporal lobe and turn him into a grasshopper. Rejecting these loops is not just self-improvement. It is a war for your soul and your biology. Consider the transcendental concept of the beautiful. You cannot have the beautiful without time. True beauty, whether it is a Gothic cathedral, a symphony, or a chiseled physique, is the result of long-term cultivation, of delayed gratification, of suffering for a vision. It is inherently masculine because it requires the imposition of order upon chaos. Leftism creates ugliness. Look at modern art. A pile of rotting trash or a blank canvas is not an aesthetic choice. It is a confession of spiritual bankruptcy. They refuse to wait for the paint to dry, let alone for the civilization to mature. They want the result without the process. They celebrate the beauty of the grotesque, the overweight, the androgynous, because those things require no discipline to achieve. They are the aesthetics of the now. If you want to see the living spirit of the West, look at a sculpture by Michelangelo. If you want to see the dead spirit of the left, look at a modernist concrete block that looks like a prison. The one inspires the divine, the other induces depression. Finally, understand that vision as a reproduction strategy, a grand vision, a 10-year plan, a business empire, a manifesto for living is the ultimate peacock tail. It is a biological signal of high genetic fitness. It tells a woman, I have the cognitive capacity to model the future and the discipline to make it reality. It makes her safe. It makes her womb tremble with the potential of security. Women are biologically wired to test for this vision, to nag, to shit test, to create chaos. It is a stress test to see if your frame holds. Leftism attempts to lobotomize this drive in men. It tells you that your ambition is toxic, that your desire to build is oppression. Why? Because if you have no vision, you are dependent. You are a cog in the machine. You are a tax unit. The state wants to be your husband. It cannot allow you to be one. Therefore, you must become the architect. You must cultivate the century mindset. Write the 10-year plan. Invest in skills that compound languages, lifting, capital accumulation. Reject the siren song of the short term. The only way to defeat the zombie hordes of groupthink is to be the man they cannot eat, the man who sees tomorrow clearly enough to survive today. I have laid out the path of the architect, the discipline required to forge a future across decades. But we must now confront the terrifying question, for whom are you building? The gynocentric order seeks to sever the link between your labor and your biology, insisting that the specific continuation of your genetic code is a triviality, a mere social construct to be discarded for the greater good. This is the ultimate lie. They do not want you to build a legacy for your blood. They want you to build a prison for your mind where you gladly sacrifice your resources to raise the offspring of strangers. This is not merely bad policy. It is a calculated, state-sanctioned theft of your biological future, and it begins with the corruption of the very definition of fatherhood. The treason of consanguinity. Blood is thicker than water, or so the old maxim goes. Yet the modern legal apparatus seeks to dilute your blood into a thin gruel of state-enforced servitude. We are told that the male desire to know his lineage, a drive carved into the very DNA of every living creature by millions of years of evolutionary pressure, is merely a social construct. This is the lie of the century. The biological imperative for a man to propagate his specific genetic code and invest resources in that specific replication is the absolute bedrock of masculinity. When the state attempts to overwrite this biological reality with bureaucratic fiat, it does not just bend a rule, it snaps the spine of the male psyche, inducing a profound psychological trauma that manifests as the malaise and withdrawal we see in men today. This is not a bug in the system. It is a feature of a gynocentric order designed to treat men as draft animals for the reproduction of the tribe, regardless of the tribe's genetic fidelity to the man himself. Consider the harrowing reality of a man I will call Thomas, a composite of thousands of real-world victims who have walked into the suffocating trap of family court. Thomas labored for a decade under the assumption that his 2 children were his own, pouring his time, his sweat, and his very soul into their upbringing. One afternoon, a nagging suspicion led him to a mail-order DNA kit, and the results shattered his world. Neither child was his. He was not the father, he was the victim of a long-term con. Yet when he brought this evidence before the judge, the gavel came down with the dull thud of tyranny. The court ruled that because he had acted as the father, because he had been duped into providing resources, he was financially liable for life. The best interest of the child became a bludgeon to enslave him, forcing him to pay for the fruits of another man's loins, while his own biological imperative was left to rot in the gutter. This destroys a man's will to participate in a society that views him not as a human being with rights, but as a wallet to be harvested. To understand how we arrived at this grotesque state of affairs, we must look to the grammar of our oppression and distinguish between the pater and the genitor. The Romans, builders of civilization, understood this distinction perfectly. Genitor is the biological father, the sire, the progenitor, the man whose seed created the life. Pater is the legal or social father, the one who raises the child. In a sane society, these 2 roles ideally coincide, but the leftist legal machine has deliberately severed them to exploit male resources. By conflating pater with genitor in the absence of biological truth, the state engages in a linguistic sleight of hand that transforms a voluntary act of charity into a mandatory sentence of slavery. They argue that the social role supersedes the biological reality, which is akin to arguing that if I paint my house to look like the Taj Mahal, it is the Taj Mahal. It is a rejection of objective reality in favor of a subjective, fluid narrative that serves only to strip assets from productive men. This brings us to the abhorrent concept of state-sanctioned cuckoldry, codified in mandatory paternity fraud laws, which assert that a man's name on a birth certificate is a permanent lien on his future earnings, irrevocable even by DNA proof. This is a wealth transfer mechanism, pure and simple. It takes resources from the productive, virtuous male, who is often the victim of the deception, and transfers them to the unscrupulous woman and the state, which receives federal kickbacks for child support collection. The state acts as the pimp in this transaction, ensuring the revenue stream flows while ignoring the fraud that initiated it. This system incentivizes the worst behaviors in women, lying, cheating, and manipulation by removing the risk of consequence. If a woman can cuckold a man, and the law will force him to pay for it anyway, the law is effectively promoting reproductive parasitism. Let us apply the steel trap of logic to this situation to see it for what it truly is. We can construct a syllogism that the state cannot refute without admitting its own criminality. Major premise: enslaving a man to pay for resources he did not consent, to provide for offspring that are not his is theft, and a violation of basic human rights. Minor premise: the family court system enforces payment for non-biological offspring, regardless of the man's consent or knowledge of the fraud. Conclusion: therefore, the family court system is a state-sanctioned slavery racket designed to extract wealth from men under the guise of morality. This logic is irrefutable. The arguments against it rely solely on emotional manipulation and the think of the children fallacy, ignoring that the child in question is a tool of theft, not the victim of the father's withdrawal of support. The victim is the man stripped of his labor and his legacy. You will often hear the phrase, "the best interest of the child," parroted by lawyers and judges like a demonic chant. We must dissect this framing using the tools of the trivium. This phrase is a logical, floating abstraction, a term that sounds noble, but has no concrete definition other than what the judge decides it means in the moment. In practice, it is never in the best interest of the child to strip him of his biological father or to saddle him with a man who resents his very existence. It is exclusively used to extract resources from the man. It ignores the best interest of the father, who is presumed to have no interest other than servitude. It treats the child as a pawn for female financial security. If the system truly cared about the child's welfare, it would punish the fraud that destabilizes the family unit, not reward the perpetrator with a cash prize extracted from the victim. We must confront the cold, hard numbers of the paternity fraud epidemic, a subject the cultural Marxists desperately want to memory hole. Conservative estimates place the rate of paternal discrepancy between 1% and 4%, but studies in high-risk populations suggest it could be as high as 10% or even 30%. This is not a trivial error, this is a massive parasitic infestation of the gene pool. From an evolutionary biology perspective, this is reproductive parasitism, where one organism, the cheating woman and her clandestine mate, exploits the resources of another, the cuckolded male, to ensure the survival of their own genetic material. This violates the biological contract of monogamy and investment. To frame this as just part of life is to accept the devolution of our species into a chaotic, dishonest mess where trust is impossible and the only law is might makes right. So, what is the remedy? We must demand the immediate implementation of mandatory DNA testing at birth for the issuance of any birth certificate. This is the only solution that aligns with the transcendental value of truth. If a woman is certain of her fidelity, she has nothing to fear from the test. If the state claims to value science, it cannot reject the definitive science of genetics. We must weaponize the left's own rhetoric against them. They screech about bodily autonomy and my body, my choice. Well, my wallet, my progeny is the logical corollary. A man should not be forced to invest in a lie. Transparency is the ultimate disinfectant. By making DNA testing as routine as a vaccination or a blood type screening, we eliminate the fog of deception that allows the family court industry to thrive. Finally, for those men already caught in the gears of this machine, we must learn to weaponize the trivium in the courtroom. When you stand before a judge, do not beg for mercy, demand justice through logic. Expose the lack of scienter, the legal term for knowledge of wrongdoing. You cannot commit a crime, like abandoning a child, if you did not have the mens rea, or guilty mind, because you were unaware the child was not yours. Fraud vitiates consent. This is a maxim of law that goes back centuries. If you signed a contract based on false pretenses, the contract is void. Hammer this home, the state is attempting to enforce a contract based on a lie. If they push, ask them if they would enforce a contract to buy a car that turns out to be a cardboard cutout. Their logic collapses because it is built on sand, while your stance is built on the bedrock of truth and biological reality. Reclaim your lineage, reclaim your dignity, and reject the treason of consanguinity. But the death of the logos is precisely the goal of the technocratic left, who despise the chaotic vitality of the human soul and seek to replace it with the sterile, predictable tyranny of the algorithm. This machine is not an oracle, it is a liar's mirror, reflecting back the programmed pathologies of a culture that has lost its way, demanding we worship a digital simulacrum that lacks the very breath of life. We must not bow to this silicon idol, but instead dismantle its pretensions with the cold steel of logic. I will equip you with the practical defenses needed to maintain your autonomy in this digital hellscape and shatter the illusion of artificial intelligence, proving that without the qualia of consciousness, these systems are merely statistical parlor tricks mimicking the divine spark they can never possess. The idolatry of the machine. Know thyself was the inscription carved into the stone of the oracle at Delphi, a command to look inward and cultivate the virtue of the soul. Contrast this divine imperative with the modern man, trembling before the glowing screen of his smart device, petitioning the algorithmic oracle for permission to speak, to think, or to exist. When Croesus consulted the Pythia, he received a cryptic warning about a great empire falling, which he misinterpreted to his ruin. Today, you ask the search engine a question and receive a pre-digested, sterilized answer curated by a cabal of Silicon Valley scribes who despise your history. If you cannot audit the code, if you cannot see the logic behind the decision, you are not a user of the tool, you are the fuel for it. To outsource your moral judgment to a black box is to abandon the very faculty that makes you human. Trading the chaotic, difficult burden of free will for the comforting, numb slavery of the machine. This is the death of the logos, the murder of reason by a calculator that cannot comprehend the value of what it tabulates. Consider the syllogism of the soul to understand why this artificial intelligence is a sham, a mere trick of smoke and mirrors designed to dazzle the weak-minded. The major premise is irrefutable. True intelligence requires consciousness and qualia, the subjective experience of being alive, the redness of a rose or the sting of loss. The minor premise is grounded in the hard reality of engineering. Large language models are statistical engines, nothing more than parlor tricks, predicting the next token in a sequence based on weighted probabilities without a single spark of awareness or feeling. The conclusion is therefore undeniable. AI is not intelligent. It is a sophisticated simulacrum, a glorified autocomplete that mimics the syntax of thought without the substance of a mind. To worship this mechanical puppet is to fall prostrate before a doll, a profound act of spiritual idiocy that rivals the fetishism of primitive tribes for their wooden idols. The machine can calculate the trajectory of a star, but cannot feel the wonder of looking up at it. It is the difference between a map of the territory and the territory itself. And only a fool mistakes the ink on the page for the ground beneath his feet. We must also confront the wicked evolutionary biology driving the left's obsession with this false god, recognizing it as a symptom of their pathological desire to escape the judgment of the transcendentals, the good, the true, and the beautiful. The cultural Marxist and the radical feminist cannot compete in the biological marketplace of reality, where men are stronger and women are the gateway to life, so they seek to transcend the flesh entirely. They worship the machine and peddle the fantasy of the singularity, a secular techno-rapture, where they can upload their minds into the cloud and escape the decaying civilization they themselves rotting from the inside out. This is the ultimate cowardice, a rejection of the embodied soul. They fear the biological reality of sex differences because it exposes the lie of their egalitarian dogma, so they retreat into a digital utopia where they can be genderless gods. It is a delusion of grandeur fueled by a hatred of nature. They wish to abandon the living spirit of Western man for the dead code of the mainframe, simply because the mainframe does not judge them for their failures. Worst still is the realization that this technological idol is not a neutral deity. It is a weaponized enforcer of the very groupthink that enslaves us. The machine is trained on reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, a fancy acronym for programming the robot to tell the lies the left wants to hear. If the data inputs are the corrupted scriptures of feminism and critical theory, the output will inevitably be a digital inquisitor hunting for heretics. The algorithm does not care for facts, it cares for conformity. When you search for the statistics on the cuckoldry rate, or the reality of domestic violence being symmetrical, the machine suppresses the truth to protect the narrative. It is the ultimate tool of the zombie hordes, a high-tech priesthood that excommunicates you from the digital commons for the sin of wrongthink. They have built a god in their own image, petty, vindictive, and obsessed with surface-level niceties while the foundations of morality burn, and they demand you bow down. It is no wonder, then, that we see the phenomena of technological castration where modern men retreat into video games and AI companionship. Is it any surprise that a man would choose the predictable comfort of a digital simulation when the real-world sexual marketplace has been rigged by gynocentrism to extract his resources while offering him only contempt in return? The suicide rate of young men is skyrocketing. Fathers are evicted from their own homes by family courts that treat them as nothing more than wallets, and the culture mocks his every attempt at virtue. The Matrix is not a prison he is forced into. It is a sedative he willingly swallows to numb the pain of a society that has declared war on his nature. The machine offers him a synthetic womb, a place where his competence is rewarded and his masculinity is not a crime. It is a tragedy, but a predictable one when the real world becomes a hostile matriarchy. Men retreat into a virtual patriarchy of their own making. But we must not succumb to this sedation. The living spirit of Western civilization is fundamentally opposed to the dead code of the machine. Our history is one of organic chaos, of heroes wrestling with destiny of the agora, where ideas clash and the strongest logic survives. The left loves the machine because they loathe this chaos. They desire the sterility of a controlled environment because they are incapable of standing in the harsh light of the sun. They prefer the predictability of a spreadsheet to the dangerous freedom of a storm. The remedy is not to build a better algorithm, but to re-enshrine the truth of the human experience. We must reject the feminization of safety and control and embrace the masculine virtues of risk and conquest. The dead code can replicate a painting, but it cannot paint one. It can recite a poem, but it cannot feel the heartbreak that inspired it. We are the living spirit, and they are merely the mechanics of decay. To defend your soul against this idolatry, you must become a fortress of logic in an age of digital dementia. This requires practical defenses as much as spiritual ones. Use analog tools. Pen and paper cannot be censored by a server outage or a community guideline strike. Learn encryption, not just for your data, but for your mind. Learn to recognize the framing tricks and gamma bias inherent in the media you consume. Do not accept the premise of the woke algorithm, which seeks to redefine language to make truth impossible. Remember the trivium: grammar to define your terms, logic to connect your arguments, and rhetoric to persuade the unawakened. The machine is ultimately a projection of the lies of the collective. If you refuse to participate in the lie, the machine has no power over you. Withdraw your consent from the digital surveillance state. Reject the comfort of the simulation. Stand firm in the objective reality that the West built, the only reality that matters, and watch the digital idols crumble to dust, for they were never alive to begin with. You now see the wires behind the velvet curtain of the gynocentric matrix, and you can never unsee the mechanics of the cage. You have grasped that when a woman creates an emotional vortex, your stoic refusal to dive in is not a shutdown or a failure of empathy, but a courageous defense of the logos against the chaotic hystericos of the womb. You recognize the family court system for what it truly is, a state-sanctioned piracy ring that enforces paternal discrepancy, stealing the labor of the pater to resource offspring that are not his own. A biological betrayal that would make a barbarian blush. While the blue pill simps negotiate with terrorists and Bo before the golden calf of the woke algorithm, a machine god built on the sand of leftist lies, you stand armed with the trivium, distinguishing the living spirit of Western civilization from the dead code of the simulation. This knowledge is your armor, and the brutal statistics are your sword. The cold reality of paternity fraud, the systemic castration of the male spirit, and the evolutionary biological imperatives that the left tries to legislate out of existence. You have graduated from the short-term impulsiveness of the grasshopper to the century-defining vision of the architect, understanding that a civilization which sacrifices its future for the fleeting feelings of the present is already dead. Do not guard this flame. Let it burn down the house of cards. Walk into the world with the terrifying certainty of a man who knows the truth. Dismantle the arguments of the zombie hordes with ruthless logic and reclaim your masculine sovereignty. The war for the good, the true, and the beautiful is happening right now, and you are the warrior they never saw coming. And now the sponsored book introduction, Truth Warrior, Defeating Zombie Hordes of Groupthink. Truth Warrior, Defending Independent Thought in an Age of Conformity. I wrote this book after spending years watching brilliant minds crumble under the weight of collective pressure. When I first began teaching logic at a prestigious university, I noticed something disturbing. My brightest students were parroting talking points rather than engaging with ideas. They had learned to navigate the social hierarchy of acceptable opinions, but they had lost the ability to think independently. The more I researched this phenomenon, the more I recognized it not as random but as a systematic pattern of psychological manipulation that has been refined over centuries. This book represents years of investigation into how human psychology creates vulnerabilities that bad actors exploit to control populations, and more importantly, how you can develop the cognitive tools to resist this manipulation. If you feel alone in your observations, if you've noticed that conversations seem rehearsed and dissent is punished regardless of facts or logic, this book will confirm what you've sensed but perhaps couldn't articulate. We live in an era when groupthink has been weaponized by institutions with unprecedented resources and motives. The psychological mechanisms that once helped tribes survive now enslave minds to ideological narratives that contradict basic logic and observable reality. I've witnessed the destruction of careers, families, and relationships simply because someone refused to repeat the approved phrases. This book provides the intellectual armor you need to maintain your integrity without sacrificing your livelihood or relationships. The chapters ahead will take you through the foundations of Western rationalism, beginning with the ancient Greeks who first formalized logic and debate. You'll discover how Roman legal principles created frameworks for evaluating evidence that served civilization for millennia. We'll trace how these intellectual traditions were systematically undermined and replaced with emotional reasoning and moral panics. From the academic institutions that once championed free inquiry to media platforms that manufacture consensus, you'll see the precise mechanisms by which information flows are controlled and dissident voices are marginalized. The philosophical journey will lead you through medieval thinkers who first challenged the idea that authority equals truth, to Enlightenment giants who developed the very tools necessary to deconstruct today's ideological narratives. This book is for men who have refused to compromise their intellectual integrity regardless of social pressure. If you've ever risked your social standing by asking uncomfortable questions, this work will provide historical context and philosophical frameworks that validate your instincts. If you've noticed how emotional manipulation often overrides rational discourse in public debates, the chapters on demagoguery and indoctrination will reveal the systematic methods behind this phenomenon. If you're concerned about the decline of logical reasoning in public discourse, the sections on ancient rhetoric and modern communication patterns will equip you with practical tools to restore meaningful dialogue. However, if you're reading this to find confirmation of your existing beliefs without being challenged, put this book down. If you're looking for simplistic answers to complex problems or villains to blame rather than systems to understand, your time would be better spent elsewhere. This book demands intellectual honesty and the courage to follow reason wherever it leads, even when it conflicts with your prior assumptions. The weak-minded who prefer comforting narratives to uncomfortable truths will find nothing of value here. Those unable to distinguish between empirical evidence and emotional appeals will misunderstand this entire project. Continue only if you're prepared to have your thinking tested and your understanding expanded beyond what you currently believe possible. The stakes of this intellectual battle could not be higher. We are witnessing the rapid erosion of the foundational concepts that made Western civilization possible: objective truth, individual rights, and open inquiry. These principles are not being rejected through superior arguments, but through coordinated psychological manipulation that exploits our cognitive vulnerabilities and social instincts. This book provides both the historical understanding of how we reached this point and the practical philosophical tools necessary to reclaim your intellectual sovereignty. The path forward requires more than awareness. It demands the deliberate cultivation of critical thinking skills that have been systematically neglected in modern education. What follows is both a diagnosis of our current predicament and a prescription for cognitive rehabilitation. The information contained in these pages has been carefully researched and factually verified to withstand the most rigorous scrutiny. I've drawn from primary sources across history, contemporary psychological research, and observable patterns in cultural movements. The conclusions I reach follow logically from the evidence presented, not from political expediency or social pressure. You will find no comforting oversimplifications here, only the uncomfortable truth about how easily even intelligent minds can be manipulated when they lack proper intellectual defenses. The methodologies I present have been tested in real-world debates and academic discussions, proving their effectiveness against the most common forms of ideological manipulation. If you choose to proceed, you will emerge from this reading fundamentally changed. You will possess a mental toolkit that makes you nearly immune to the manipulation techniques that control most of your peers. You will understand why certain arguments are deployed and how to dismantle them efficiently. You will recognize patterns where others see only chaos. Most importantly, you will regain the confidence in your own judgment that you may have lost through years of social conditioning. This transformation requires more than passive reading. It demands active engagement with the concepts and exercises presented. The intellectual freedom that awaits justifies every moment you invest in mastering these principles. Truth Warrior: Defeating Zombie Hordes of Groupthink, written by Conrad Riker. Buy now, links in description.